having a great day. Well, we have the title of Harry's new book, Spare, with a stark photograph of him on the cover, and it's coming out January 10th. A lot of people are really offended with the title of the book. How could he? That's so cruel, even the title. But the thing is, Harry has been an angry, disillusioned soul since the time he was a child. Everybody knows he was not happy in the royal family and he would have left years ahead. So he already had a big chip on his shoulder and a lot of problems that we know of. And when Megan came along, she played on all of his weaknesses, but in his eyes, he gave her a way out. He gave she gave him a way out. He always wanted to leave, and here's this girl comes along and say, "Hey, we can go do our own thing, Mex it, baby." And so Harry went right along with it. I mean, we know he's been completely manipulated, and this is going to destroy him. And he's too blind to see it. And in the process, he's managed to anger his whole family. And now we've got the book coming out. Charles is king. We've got the situation where Harry is still a counselor of state, even though he doesn't live in Britain. He hates the monarchy. He's angry with everybody in there. You want this guy making decisions for the same, really, same point. You could say the same thing with Andrew. He's a counselor of state. You really want this guy making decisions for the king? So, here we are. What I'm more interested, rather than gossiping and speculating about what might be in Harry's book, which we all have our ideas, I'd rather talk about how we got in this position in the first place and what the monarchy needs to do to ensure this never happens again. That's kind of the tack I'm taking on all of this. Look at Harry's life. From the time he was a toddler and William was, what, a year and a half older, 18 months older, William got to sit beside the Queen. Harry sat a couple chairs over on the floor. William got the first sandwiches on the tray because, in the monarchy's mind, the heir has always been the important one, and the spare has been just that. Just a spare, he's just there, not really important. In their growing up years, William, from a very young age, was taught and tutored and schooled in all things royal, all things kingly, all things parliamentary. When he was at Eton as a teenager, he used to go over to Windsor Castle on Sundays and lunch with the Queen. And I'm sure she wasn't just talking about the football scores with him. Those were private moments with the Queen, where as a teenager, she would have been grooming him, mentoring him, having those private moments to discuss serious things with him. Harry never got that. Harry never even got a proper education because he was the spare, because he didn't have the responsibility his brother did. Nobody pushed him at school. Got to the point that by the time he was at Eton, you had teachers fiddling with his marks and with his grades to push him through. Where were the tutors? Where were the teachers. I guess you could say, well, no teacher's going to go to Princess Diana or Prince Charles and say, look, your kid, he needs something because he's just not applying himself. I mean, there's that deference there as well. They don't want to say anything bad. And this is a prince, and I'm just a teacher. And, so there's that whole kind of class thing in there, too, that worked to their disadvantage. But nobody pushed Harry to excel at school for the time he was little. Diana's even said it herself. She understood the role that William was going to have to take, and Harry was important. She wanted the boys to have a good relationship because Harry was going to grow up to be a support to his brother, the king. He was going to be an advisor, a sounding board, someone that, a confidant to William. Pretty important role to be at the shoulder of the king. But on the other hand, he doesn't have those responsibilities. So, you know, Diana thought she could pamper him and baby him and spoil him and just make him happy. Oh, he's always going to be the spare, so his happiness is important. They never gave him any direction. They never gave him tough love, if you want to call it that. He never got the level of education his brother did on kingly things and constitutional things and matters of state and politics and government. And if they'd have wanted him to have that kind of an education, they would have got the tutors. They would have instilled in Harry that his education is the most important thing from day one. But they didn't because they knew in their minds his education, he's royal. What does he need? He's never going to be king. A huge misstep as far as I'm concerned. And I think this is part of the reason that Harry went off the rails. I mean, from the time he was 8 years old, everybody's been talking about who's your daddy. They never put a stop to that either. There's that speculation's been out there, and I'm sure he heard it as a grade school kid. He lost his mother just short of his 13th birthday. Big trauma, for sure. But you'd say, oh, well, 25, 30 years ago, get over it. But think about it for a minute. And first of all, don't think I'm defending Harry at all. I'm not. I'm just trying to say how we got here. We know he's disturbed, but how'd we get here? Diana spoiled him. He was her baby. He was her plaything because she knew William had a particular role. So he was treated differently, he was educated differently, he was taught to differently, and more was expected of him. Not so with Harry. He was just like, just have fun. You have the freedom. You don't have the responsibility. But the thing is, he didn't get any direction either. Nobody told him that as his brother's keeper, you might say, how important that role was. And he needed to understand certain things to fulfill that role. But at the same time, you also have the freedom to be able to pursue something for yourself. But they should have instilled in him from the very beginning that his role as perhaps his brother's principal advisor is almost as important as being king. And when you look at history, um, all the spares were treated the same way. All of them. And and it's put the monarchy in jeopardy more than once. Go back to the king's father, King George III. Well, his brother, King Edward, was on the throne. Well, he never actually lasted very long, just less than a year. But when he abdicated, and Bertie, the Queen's father, when Edward abdicated and Bertie realized he was going to be king, granted he was an adult, he was married with children. He cried on Queen Mary's shoulder because he was horrified and full of fear. Because growing up, of course, Edward, the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, got all the education, got all the constitutional tutoring, all the matters of state and government and kingly things he was educated in. And Bertie, as the spare, was not. So he came to the crown not knowing anything, completely at sea, a duck out of water. He was terrified. So, at the age of 10, Princess Elizabeth becomes the heir apparent. From that moment, her education was very directed, very focused. Even though she only became queen at 25, she was one of the most well educated monarchs out there because her education started when she was 10 years old. She was taken seriously, and her education was taken seriously. Even her father, King George III, said about his daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, Elizabeth is my pride. Margaret is my joy. Margaret was the spare. She was an entertainment to him. She was a jolly to him. She had no responsibility. She was a free spirit, fun. They spoiled her. She got away with whatever she wanted. They didn't discipline her in the same way that they disciplined Elizabeth, or more so taught Elizabeth a life of discipline and duty. Margaret was just this freewheeling, but then again, that's all very good, you know. When her father died, Margaret was 18 when Elizabeth became queen at 25. Um, 18 or 19, somewhere in there. But her father had been the only one. Like, he spoiled her, he loved her, he doted on her, she adored him. And just like when Diana died, and Harry was completely lost as a child because the one person in the world that spoiled them and gave them any kind of purpose at all, even though it was just, you know, Harry was Diana's cuddly toy. Margaret was King George's joy, his amusement. When you lose the only person in your life that showed you any worth of any kind and any purpose, even though that purpose was as a plaything, you lose something of yourself. Margaret, her whole life was dictated by the Queen and by the monarchy and royal rules. She never found happiness. She was never joyful. She was always resentful, and she said it. You can hear it in interviews. She was resentful that she never got the same education that Elizabeth did, because she was smart and clever and artsy and a love of music and these kinds of things. She was not allowed to develop any of those things. Perhaps if she'd been alive, a generation later, she might have had the opportunity to go to university and develop herself a little bit more and find some purpose. But as it was, she really had kind of a tragic life. And even the queen, having seen this and seen what happened with her own children, you'd have thought she might have done something different, but she really did not. Charles, from day one, from the day he was born, he was going to be king someday. Anne came along, and Anne was just, Anne, at that time, she would never have been in the line of succession. So her role wasn't important anyway. But that law's since been changed, I think, since when Charlotte was born. The Queen had that amended as far as the line of succession being available to females in the family as well, which is a good thing. However, you know, so Anne just kind of trotted through life, did not a spectacular student, but she was horsey and sporty, and she did find some purpose that way. She was an Olympic medalist. She actually did things outside of the royal family that gave her purpose. But now Andrew, the spare again, he's never had the same education Charles has had. He's never had an introduction into the depth of knowledge of all things kingly as Charles has had. Again, just like Margaret and just like Harry, Andrew was spoiled rotten from day one. It's been widely speculated and said that he was the Queen's favorite. There's speculation as to why, but we don't need to get into that here. Um, he was spoiled, he was entertained, he was given everything he wanted. Um, even positions within the palace, the pitch the palace and this and that, different initiatives he's had over the years, just like Harry with Centibele and um, Invictus. Those were programs started by the palace planners to give the spare something to do, something to focus on. It wasn't an original thought. It was nothing that they had a burning desire to actually do something and accomplish something and be something. They were just pushed along and fitted in because you got to give them something because they really don't count. Spare doesn't count, and they know it. And just like Harry, from a very early age, Andrews had those same speculation thrown at him and tossed about in the media. Who's your daddy? Look up Lord Porchester. He was the Queen's horse manager, and there's some pretty interesting information there. I'm not saying whether it's true or not. Who knows? We'll never know. But there's been that speculation too. So you've got personal identity issues. Who's my daddy? You've got identity issues within the institution of the monarchy, which also means identity issues within your own just tight family, let alone how do you build an identity out of that on the world stage? Because from the time these guys were all children, they were on the world stage. Never notice? William was always the studious, serious one. And from the time he was 3 years old, oh, Harry's the impish little, wild little boy with a sense of humor. And, they set his personality up from the very beginning. And over the years, he took the fall for William many, many times. How many times you can go on the internet once a day and see a new story about Harry in his Nazi uniform? Well, that was at a party whose theme was colonialists and slaves. And that party was hosted by another little aristocratic 20-year-old friend of William and Harry's. Yeah, William was at that party too. Nobody knows what costume he wore. Nobody knows what he did because it was never reported. It was never in the press. So Harry's the bad guy? What about everybody else at that party? If William was so serious and worried about his image, why would he have ever attended a party like that, let alone let his brother go? Why didn't he say to Harry, you can't wear a Nazi armband, man? But you see, William knew Harry's role is to take the fall for him, and it's been that way their whole lives. Harry did get the shit end of the stick, just like every other spare. And I'm not saying, that that I sympathize with Harry or anything like that. I think what he's done has been horrendous. But look at the situation. I mean, he grows up. He's an angry young man. By the time he was, 20 years old, he wanted a way out. Along comes Megan. She offers him a way out, of course. And he's not that smart. He's very naive. He's never had to do anything on his own. He's never had an original thought. She comes along and bowls him over and uses all her manipulative tactics to snare him in. And he thinks this is just like a miracle. So he jumped it. But keep in mind, he's still got all those resentments and stuff in his soul and in his head. And Megan absolutely uses all of that against him. She does. She eggs him on. She pushes him on. And so it's not surprising given the fact that they've had to monetize their lives and their associations to make any money. You know, they exploit everything they can. It's not surprising that this book is on the horizon. Think about it. Harry's been very angry for very long, whether it's unfounded or not, and notwithstanding his upbringing and everything else, it's there. Now he feels free enough to be able to just vent his spleen. Because, of course, Megan's egging him on. And what they're doing, don't get me wrong, is not a good idea. It will harm Harry's reputation more than he knows. It'll hurt the royal family, and if he has any wishes at all to fix his relationship with the royal family, this is gonna just explode everything. Harry's gonna, it's gonna destroy him. But I can see how it got to this point. He was just like all the other spares, never valued. And you grow up knowing you're not valued. It's going to play on your psyche. It's going to derail you, just like every other spare. What I hope, having an understanding of this and knowing the position they're now in, with Harry and the book and Meghan and all the crap that they say and do and their spitefulness and treacherousness, I would really hope that William and Kate do better with their children. Um, George is, I think, 9 years old. He's probably already getting an understanding of what his future role will be. Now that the line of succession laws have changed, Charlotte is next in line. One thing good to see, all the kids are being educated at the same school, so they'll get the same basic education. But what I would hope is that William, having an understanding perhaps of what may have happened to Harry, knows that his other children cannot be called the spares. They've got to have their own value. And really, in their situation, given the way things we've got now, I think that Charlotte and Louis should both have access to the same level of education about constitutional issues and monarchical issues and government things and all of those things that George will learn as being an heir to the throne. I think if her kids are supposed to play a supporting role to their brother when he becomes king, they need the same level of education. And that is the way you could turn this around so we never face the situation we're facing now. What's going to happen now? I don't know. Like I said before, Charles, instead of just expanding the counselors of state, he's got to get rid of Harry and he's got to get rid of Andrew. They should be stripped of all their titles. Their children that don't exist should be stripped of all of their, well, not given any titles. They should be all removed from the line of succession. And from here on out, Harry and Meghan should be banished from Britain. They've proven they can't be trusted. Charles has hard decisions. He's got to do that. But part of the reason that we're in this situation is that the spare always got the short end of the stick. And I really hope that William and Kate, excuse me, I really hope that William and Kate take a different stance, value each of their children, and educate them all on the importance of monarchical things. and then maybe we'll not face this again. Oh, excuse me, dry throat. Um, we'll get through this. Charles has to set down a hard line, and William and Kate must change the future and make sure every one of their kids is as ready to take the throne as the other. That's the only way that this is going to continue and this is going to be successful, or you're always going to have the problem of despair. Have a great day, everybody. Like and subscribe and leave me a comment. Bye.